Greetings hobbyists, this is Arsans of All, and in this video we're going to be having a look at the best way to make 3D printable rubble. So to give everything a fair start, what I've got here is a set of blocks that I'm being used as large paving slabs, or large marble slabs to be exact, for some Custodes bases that I've been working on. And I've already made one for a Telemon Dreadnought, but this is going to be for the normal infantry. And what we've got here is the blocks that I'm going to cut this out of. I've added some detail to a few here, and I've also got my 40mm base cutter there ready to go. I'm not going to bother adding all the detail to the rest of them, and in fact I've actually broken this down just to be those blocks for now. So what I'm going to do is press Ctrl and I, and I'm going to hide everything else with the H button. So at this point we've just got this block left here. I've just realised that the origin isn't set to the geometry here, so I'm going to do that. So I'm actually going to Shift and S and move the cursor to this as well, just so that we've got somewhere to put a plane or a cube, and that's going to be what we're going to use to make our mound of rubble. During this video I'm going to have a look at two major ways of creating this rubble, both of them using geometry nodes and have been used in a video before. I'm going to go through those quite quickly, but I'm also going to have a look at a couple of other ways that we could use more manual methods to create this rubble. So if you're not keen on geometry nodes, you don't need to use those, and we will be covering those in a little bit more depth because I've not covered them before on the channel. Now at this point I really don't know which one's going to turn out better. I haven't done this previously, I'm actually just doing this because it's interesting to me and I'm hoping other people will find it interesting as well. So I'm genuinely not sure how this is going to turn out, and I'm going to discuss that at the end of this video. Now I want to be really clear about this. This is not meant to be for small amounts of scatter. I've done a video of that and you can have a look at that in the top right hand corner. Also how to make more broken up rubble from a specific object. And again, that's not what this is meant to be a test of. This is going to be a test of really fine grained rubble that you'd normally get in some sort of heap or mound, which normally I'd have done after the fact. I've just added this onto the base. But a few people have requested this, so why not? So I'm going to Ctrl and A, and because this is going to be for 3D printing, I'm actually going to bring in a cube as a good object to be starting with this. I'm going to press S to scale that up, S and Z to scale it down on the Z axis, something like that, just so it's a solid object. So at this point I'm going to go into face mode, select that top face, and I'm just going to subdivide it. So edge and subdivide. And then I'm just going to press Shift and R a number of times to break that up a little bit further, to make something a little bit smaller like this. And finally I'm going to go into isolation mode, go into vertex mode, Shift and Z, and I'm going to select the bottom vertices. I'm going to hide them so they're not being affected as I start doing things to the top. And I've now brought that out of isolation mode. I'm going to come up here, I think I had snapping on for something there, and I'm just going to select some of those vertices, for example here and here, and I'm going to G and Z those up using proportional editing to make that into a sort of couple of mounds there. And then I'm just going to do the same thing there, G and Z, and I'll bring that up as well. So when I go into object mode here, G and Z that down, we should have something that's going to look like a good approximation of some sort of mounds of rubble. Obviously I could do this as big or as small as I want. It's sort of irrelevant for this. I just want something, in fact let's bring that up a little bit more, that's going to be a decent size, that's going to make a good test for when I want to make some sort of rubble in the future that's going to be added onto an object. Now if I just show you where that 40mm base is, it's not going to really make a difference that some of this is going over the edge here. As soon as we boolean this all together, it's not going to cause a problem, but I am actually going to just G and Y that forward a little bit to maybe somewhere about there, just so I can see this crack detail that's on the side. Now at this point I'm going to start breaking this up, so I'm going to select all of those, Shift and D and X, and let's Shift and R to do that again, 2, and let's say that's 4. So let's start having a look at this. Now I very quickly realised that what I need to do is actually set the vertices that I want to affect on this. So in this first part of the video you'll see me just going around and selecting the areas that I want to be part of the area that's going to have the texture or the rubble, so it's not everywhere, because otherwise that would be a bit annoying. Now I have done this in all of the other areas as well, so for each of the other techniques I will be doing this, but I'm going to cut this out of the video just because otherwise we're just going to be wasting a lot of time showing the same thing again and again. So what you can see me doing here is selecting all the different vertices that are important, and then I'm going to use a vertex group, and then I'm going to select that vertex group as the one that's going to be affected by the geometry nodes or any other changes that I choose to do in later points. In this first technique, we're going to be instancing points onto these faces. Effectively, I'm going to be making, or you can see me making, some bits of rubble, and I'm doing this relatively simply because they're going to be very small. I'm just modifying some cubes to have some different sort of edges to them at the right sort of size. I'm going to make 3 different versions of this, and what's great about this with geometry nodes is that it will automatically instance these different versions onto the points, so you get some random different objects and some rubble, so it's not going to all look the same. Now, this is going to be very small. I'm not even sure this is going to make a difference in terms of how it looks. We'll see when it's printed out if this actually makes a difference. There are some problems with this technique, the first being that you're likely to get some errors when you join this together if you don't do certain techniques. For example, you can see me triangulating all of these different chunks just to reduce that potential problem. And then I'm going to use geometry nodes to set those up, and again you can see that in the video that is linked in the top right hand corner, where I go through how to do this in much more detail, and you can see all of the functions that go towards this, and you can see a nice big version of the geometry node, so you can just literally copy this yourself, just use it in a different format. In the video I was doing this for coins for a pile of treasure, but you don't have to. And here you can see the result of this. I actually think this is really nice from a just graphical point of view. You can see it's got a lot of different texture to it. The random orientation makes it look really different. It's just a very nice technique. This technique is possibly a bit simpler to understand. Effectively, what we're doing is we're just modifying all the individual points that make up the raised hills. So what I'm doing is I'm setting up a subdivision surface modifier, which is going to subdivide everything, but we're just using the selection that we've got on the vertex group to then move some of those points up and down. And what this is doing is it's doing it randomly. So some are going to go up, some are going to go down slightly. In fact, in this, all of them go up a small amount. And I've set up a node so I can control how much things are going up and down. And I'm setting it so that they don't move randomly on either the X or Y. They only move vertically, so on the Z axis. And then I'm controlling how much they can move up and down as a maximum amount. You can also control the minimum amount. And if you want areas to go down, you can set that as a minus. And I do try that out and decide that it looks a little bit too spiky. So for these last 2 methods, we're going to try something that I haven't actually shown before on the channel. And with this one, we're going to effectively do what we've just done here, but we're going to do it manually without the geometry node. So I'm going to just press / to come into isolated view. And I'm going to make this a little bit more fine grained by bringing in a subdivision surface. I'm going to make that simple. And I'm just going to do it to 1 level just because it should get across the idea and it should give us a good view of what this is going to do. So I'm going to apply that, come into vertex mode, and I'm going to do what I've done again for some of the other ones. Well, I wonder if this is going to have caused a problem. Let's OH that to bring everything out. No, that should be fine. So I'm going to come into top view. In fact, this might be a bit difficult to see zoomed out, but here we go. I'm going to press C for circle mode or circle select, and I'm going to select those ones that we want again, so the ones that are actually raised up. Come to think of it, this would probably be slightly quicker in lasso mode, but oh well, it's done now. Okay, and then all I'm going to do is press Control. Oh, I've still got some of those selected, so I need to unselect those and those. There we go. And then I'm going to press Control and I to invert those, and I'm going to press H to hide those selected ones. Now at this point I'm just going to raise some bits up like we have done with the other ones, except for instead of using geometry nodes, all I'm going to do is go into select, and I'm going to click select random, and I'm just press G, Z and move it up a little bit, and then I'm going to select off. Notice I have to select off, otherwise it will just add this to the selection that we've already got. Select random, G and Z, and I'll move those ones a little bit down. And then again, select off, select random, G and Z, and I'll move those ones up a little bit. So we've got basically the same thing there without the geometry nodes. So just some points of comparison here, because again, those look very, very similar between the two. Effectively, there's no real difference. We've pretty much done the same thing. The only difference is going to be, well, with this one, obviously I've applied everything here, but if I hadn't, I could bring that across and apply that modifier onto different objects, whereas this, I'd have to do it every single time. So no real difference other than that. I would say this one's quicker to do on a one-off. This one's obviously going to be quicker to do if you need to do it repeatedly, or you can see yourself doing it again in the future. So on to our last one, and we're going to do something a little bit different here, but it's going to effectively do the same thing. It's going to move around some of the vertices. So again, I'm going to isolate these. I'm going to come into, actually I think this is probably going to need to be subdivided. So let's actually add modifier, and we can do one more subdivision surface. Again, change that to simple. And I'm going to apply that and just check that everything's okay. And again, just because this one was a problem last time, I'm going to G and Z that one down a lot. And some of the bits are hidden, so I'm going to press Alt and H to unhide those other vertices. And we're going to do the same thing of selecting the ones we wanted. And this time we're going to move these around in a slightly different way. Let's unselect those corner ones again. Should remember that from last time. And again, we're going to assign a vertex group to this. So we're going to call this displace group. And from the name, you've probably guessed this, we're going to apply a displacement modifier for this. So what this does is effectively the same as we've done in the others, but it does it using some sort of image. So I'm going to go to add modifier, displacement, and at the moment this is displacing everything and it's moving it out, well, whatever the strength is. So I can make it go out in or less, whatever. And you can control the directions this is doing it. For example, on normals, you can do all of that. But at this point, we want to do this only the vertex group. So I'm going to go to displace group. So now we're just doing it to these. And at the moment, this sort of smush that's being made bigger, sort of like an expanding blob, is happening because we're displacing it, well, 0.3 on the normal direction. We don't want to do that. We want to displace it in a random amount. So we can actually do that in a number of ways, but we're going to apply what's called a texture. So I'm going to press plus to create a texture. So this has made a new texture here that's just been called texture. And I can rename that if I want to. Rubble 4, because it's the fourth one. And I can either go over here and click, which will bring me down to the text tab, or I could have just clicked there anyway. And I've got rubble 4, so that's the one that's going on. And I can just change this to an image or a movie. And there are some that are already available here. For example, you've got these random noise ones that will look a bit like that. This is quite extreme in this instance. And you can see what you've got is this colorized version of this. And if I come back here, what I can do is I can affect the strength. So this is going to be more or less, and I can change the mid-level as well. So that's looking a bit much. It might be better actually to do what we've done last time and change this on the Z-axis so it's only affecting the Z-axis. Let's have a look at that and change some of these mid-levels, see what that looks like. I wasn't actually intending on using these, but we can get these sort of relatively extreme up and downs. Now this is going to match this look, and we can sort of see that this does this here. It's got this sort of wavy look to it. I was actually intending to use this one, which is clouds. And clouds has this more random appearance to it. You can see that what happens here is you've got white, greys, and more close to blacks. And effectively the whites are going to be raised up, the blacks are going to be set back down, and then the greys are going to be somewhere in the middle. And if I come back to this, again, I can fiddle around with these mid-levels to move these up and down, but that's going to move everything. And I can change the strength to make this a little bit more or less extreme. Now this looks alright, but I don't think it looks very rubble-like. So we've got a bit of a problem with this one straight off. So this isn't going to look great. But we could always try some of these different ones here. For example, noise would probably be a bit closer to what we want. We can see this is a lot more fine-grained. And you've got various different choices here like marble or this one called Musgrave, which again is a bit more randomized. So you can play around with these. And there is even one for wood, which is quite cool. So let's go back to this noise one. That's effectively what we've done in the others. But we can change here our strength. And again, this is sort of randomizing the up and down. We can move the mid-level. This is actually going to do a lot more to it for this one because it's very randomized. I think 0.6 is possibly a bit extreme. Maybe something around there. So another way of making this rubble that we can use, and if we want to make it more detailed, we could always go in and add in another subdivision surface to this, and that will make this a little bit more precise. For example, these are very pointed at the moment. That's going to look awful when we try to 3D print that, but I can change that with So something like that looks alright. We can again have a go at 3D printing that and see what it looks like. So this is what we've ended up with, 5 bases all with slightly different ways of creating this rubble-like texture. Just for context, this is base number 1, and this is one that is using the geometry nodes to create instances on the points, and you'll notice that this, and I could have remeshed this a little bit finer, but this definitely has a more granular texture when you have a look at it in the 3D viewport. It does look more like grains of rubble, so that's worth mentioning and something to look out for when we print it. We've got 2 and 3, which I've put together here. These have been made in exactly the same way. So this was using the procedural method, where all we did is we used the geometry nodes to randomly raise these different bits or the different vertices up and down. And all I've done here is 3 is one that's a little bit coarser. I haven't used as much of a subdivision surface, and here I've used an extra level of subdivision surface, which has basically made it a little bit more fine-grained. And again, I'm curious to see what that's going to look like in comparison to these two. So 1 and 3 are the more comparable here, but 2 is going to be worth looking out for, because with the procedural method, this is very, very simple to do. It's just one click of a button and it all changed from that to this. So really, really quick to make those changes. 4 is our method where we didn't do it procedurally, but we came in and manually randomized how high each of these vertices were. And you should see that 3 and 4 are very, very similar. In fact, I really don't expect to see a difference in the appearance of these two, because effectively they've just been done the same way. It's just this one's been done manually for number 4, 3 was done using the geometry nodes, and then we've got 5 here, where we've done this using our noise texture, so we didn't have quite as much control here. And you'll notice that's got a slightly different texture, even though theoretically it's the same as these. Noise texture randomly generates bits going up and down. The noise texture just seems to have more in the middle ground and less of the higher points, which is possibly going to give this a more sort of chunky texture to it. So here are our 5 bases, and my apologies if the lighting is a little bit washed out. I'm using the camera on my phone and I don't have a proper video camera for this, so it might be a little bit white. So let's have a look at 1 and 3, those ones that we're most interested in. So we were expecting 1 to be a bit more granular, show the texture a little bit better because of the geometry nodes and the instances that were made to create this, but really, actually it doesn't look very different to 3. I was actually quite surprised at this. They basically look identical. There's a little bit extra texture on 1, but not by much. And I would say that I think the extra effort that it takes to put 1 together, and especially to boolean the points together, which I didn't show you on screen, it was a real pain. It's just not really worth it. Look at them, they're almost identical in texture. The only thing I will say in defense of method 1 is you do have more options with it, and you can see on the screen here I'm adding a random value node to the size or the scale, and what that allows me to do is effectively make a bigger variation in the size of the chunks. And this is really useful if you want to have that little bit of extra variation, and it is something that probably is worth trying out. When looking at 2 and 3, which are made using the same method, just with 2 having an additional subdivision surface level on it, we've got what we expected. We've got variations in the size of the grains, and to be fair, it's worked really well. I'd say 2 is probably better for something that's going to be, say, a sand dune, where you want a real consistent size, but 3 has got that larger grain size again, and you can see a bigger variation between the highs and the lows of it. Now comparing 4 and 3, or well 3 and 4, we did expect these to look the same, and they do. 1 was created with the geometry nodes and 1 was created more manually, but they're effectively the same thing and they should look the same, which means whichever method you prefer, the geometry nodes or the manual method, you can go for. No problem there, whichever one works fine. I would say I prefer 3, it's just going to be a little bit easier to do repeatedly. Finally, comparing 5 and 3 is really interesting. Now, all the others look basically the same, so I'm just going to use 3 as a representation, but you'll notice 5 is the one that looks most different. And even though creating it using a noise texture should create the same thing, it's just varying the points up and down, just like all the others, it seems to have more mid-level. You'll notice that there are a few larger chunks, but the majority is sort of middling in size, which gives some more standout points that you can see, and that looks really quite nice. Probably a little bit better where you want something to represent a variation in size. Something like a destroyed building, I would say, So a lot to digest there. So again, please do say if there's a method that you've got a favourite for. Is there one that you intend to use, or is there a method that you use already that I haven't covered? Please do feel free to say in the comments. It's really interesting to hear what people are doing and if you've got any use for the things that I produce. As always, if you found the video useful, I'd really appreciate you giving it a like or commenting. It does help disseminate the video and it means that more people see it, which means more people get to know the channel and hopefully the things that you've found useful.